Hey, this is Rob Anspach with E-Heroes, and today is a little different. Yes, this is episode 410, if you're paying attention. But I want to go back to the 90s. I want to go back where the internet was just exploding. It was young and fun, and search engines actually wanted you to search naturally. And so my next guest, David Warthen, who is one of the early founders of Ask Jeeves, I asked him to come on board because Ask Jeeves shut down. I think it was May 1st of this year, 2026, but it started in 1996, so 30 years ago. And so I made a video, I posted it on LinkedIn, and that's how David found me. I reached out and I thought, this story needs to be told. People need to hear about the early days of the internet. And so I want to welcome David to the show, and let's just do a deep dive.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for having me on. And just that's rather open-ended. But let me start, I guess, with around just a little before Ask Jeeves was founded as a company. Uh, my co-founder, Garrett Gruner, who I had worked for at a previous startup company that he had co-founded with other people. He in late 1995 had shared with me just some observations and an idea he had that he called Jeeves. That was what he was seeing on the internet in terms of search technologies wasn't very approachable or friendly. And his notion was to make it that way, we should just do something that answers people's questions.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to answer every question, just answer, the ones that people really want to know. And so that led us to sort of working on developing something. I was the programmer, and at that point, he was a venture capitalist working at Alta Partners firm. But, and so, we worked on it for half a year or whatever, sort of putting together a primitive version. And we said, my God, the world is moving fast. Alta Vista had launched, Excite and InfoSeek, I think, were the dominant search engines. And Lycos, I think, was out there. Yahoo was the huge company in the space with what was essentially a directory, an internet directory, more like, so you would browse through their links to find your way to sites. And they had a search capability, but it was not very sophisticated at that juncture. So in June of 96, we said, okay, if we're going to do this, we really got to be serious. So we founded the company in June of 96. Each kicked in a little over $100,000 in a couple of
That was a
tranches.
lot back then.
Well, that was my salaries at that time in previous companies were like, a bit over 100,000.
Mm-hmm.
So we were each putting up $100,000 stake, so a year's salary, or a little, it was after tax dollars, pre-tax dollars, so it's a little confusing, but that sort of stake. And we didn't put it all up at once; we kind of did it in chunks. But we hired a couple of programmers to help me, and some what we called content curators. We called them content editors then, but they were essentially content curators to sort of fill in the knowledge base of questions that Jeeves knew how to answer. And the key there is that internet searches, like a lot of things, follow this long tail curve. And so there are a relatively smaller number of searches that are asked 80% of the time. They're very frequent. And then a whole bunch that are long tail that search technology was actually really good at finding, because those terms were rarer. So if you found documents with those terms in them, those keywords in them, you could match and probably have a better job. And so that made, by working then with our search partners, we had a very effective 1-2 punch of these questions in the form of a question that Jeeves knew how to answer, backdrop with more conventional search results. And that was interesting, and we were chugging along or whatever, but it wasn't, in a way, distinctive or differentiated enough. So we said, let's take this haphazard name that my co-founder had chosen, which is Jeeves, because the idea is it's at your service. I mean, neither of us had read the P.G. Wodehouse stories. We just associated Jeeves with like this at your service butler type of character, right? And so Jeeves.com was taken. So I registered Ask Jeeves. And I was a big believer in character-based interfaces. Apple had been exploring that with different characters, and in like some of their CD-ROM, you know, educational or games or whatever. This sort of like crusty minor characters or whatever that were the narrator or spokesperson or host for the whatever it was, and uh, uh, that seemed to me really valuable because that character could then embody some of the characteristics or principles of the service that you wanted to project. And ours were very much helpful, at your service, and approachable. And so uh, we Garrett had a friend who was sort of a entrepreneur slash consultant named Penny Finney, who found a couple of artists, and the first couple of designs that came back didn't resonate at all. But then, by marvelous chance, she came across someone who I think is enormously talented named Marco Sorensen, who is a graphic artist. He's designed swatches, he's done all sorts of things, but he came up with the Jeeves character. And it was like I think not just me, but we thought it was a perfect fit. And so we went with that and embodied it on the character on the site. We had ask a question or ask me a question or something like that. A large text entry box, because a lot of the search engines were turning into portals. Do you remember the big portal phase in sort of the later part of the mid '90s? And their search boxes were these little things on the side, but we encourage people to really enter some text, which gives you a lot more to work with if you can
Mhm.
get them to enter a bit more technologically. And then we're trying to make it approachable. And the sort of the idea there was, the internet was new. It was intimidating. It was kind of scary. It was very alive, generated a lot of excitement. But for an awful lot of people, it was, weird. They didn't hear World Wide Web. What the hell is that?
Right. And
The
it
web,
was simple,
browsing.
and it was
Yeah,
funny because when you look at your simple browser button,
right,
Google copied that years after,
right.
and they simplified everything, and because they
Yeah,
used to have all the blue links and everything, and it was intimidating. And then they
yeah.
switched to a single button, and
E- Eric Schmidt, CEO of Google, commented that in a presentation or a speech that I attended up on the UC Berkeley campus. By the way, we were founded in Berkeley, about a half block from campus, so I got to leverage some of the really talented people around there. And then, but he said, some of Astra's biggest contributions were actually that they had a very simple website with a big search entry box. He
mhm,
said, Astra's got like uh, queries that were a word or more longer than everyone else,
mhm,
and you can do a lot more with an extra word.
yeah,
So I think that was, but it was just because we are trying to make it approachable. And if you think of the search engines of that era, for those who remember them, like Excite, they bragged about coming back with millions of results. I
mhm,
don't want millions of
no,
results, right? I want a couple of good ones. And they bragged about supporting Boolean searches, which is really them saying we're going to train the users to use our interface the way we want them to, not the way that they come to. We said, okay, ask us a question. What could be more natural than that? And we made it approachable and so on and so forth. And that resonated. So in April of '96, the site was good enough. We launched it on like our 2 servers or something like that, in a hosting center just up the street. Um, as probably one of about 25 servers there, 30 servers, small institutes. Just a few years later, there were these huge complexes with thousands of servers, tens of thousands of servers in them, all climate regulated and everything. But still, you had a lot of small operations then, and we started having some good fortune. So one of the things then that you could do was go on sites like Yahoo and Look Smart, if you remember them, that were essentially directories. And you could even do this, I think, on search engines. But on the directories, uh, you would be submitting your URL, your website, uh, for consideration to be included in their web directory. And a few days in, I saw this sudden surge in traffic. So I mean, we're talking in hits then. It wasn't even unique visitors yet. It was pretty primitive uh, analytics. But we were seeing just like the surge of several thousand people. And it turned out, researching it, that we were a Yahoo pick of the week. They did these picks of the week and they posted them. And Yahoo being, the number one
Mhm.
trafficked website, it got a fair amount of traffic. And that started snowballing.
Yeah.
And then word of mouth. I think you might have a few things to say on the power of word of mouth. Um, magnified it. And, we got other lucky breaks. I got contacted in that first month or two by, of all things, the producer of a talk radio show, Savage Nation, I think it was called. And they had heard about Ask Jeeves and were curious about an internet startup. And again, just even the terminology, you couldn't, if you said browser, the host would pause and explain it to his audience, right? Because, more people were not on the internet in that era of dial-up lines, that dial-up connections that then were on it.
Mhm.
And so, but it got a really good, uh, interchange going. And I don't know what of these things resulted in the traffic. There was no analytics or way to backtrace it. But we started the steady climb. There was a list. I don't remember what it's called. Later, it was Alexa had a list, but there was a list of uh, websites by traffic, right? By hits or by monthly visitors or whatever it was. And so we started appearing the list, and we saw what turned out to be a 2-year steady march up the list, way in the deep pages, right? But you can search, so we'd see, oh yes, look, we're number 17,834 this week. Uh, and the other thing was there's this advertising, free advertising site, sort of, that you could, it's not free exactly, but it's called Link Exchange. Do you
Mhm.
vaguely remember that by chance? Right.
Yeah.
So you could run ads on your site, and in return, uh, uh, you could run your ads on other people's
Yeah.
sites. Or they also had a paid service where, people could buy ads.
And the
Uh,
funny thing is that's the precursor to what now is, well, backlinks, which
right.
have gotten such a bad rap because people are
Yeah.
forcing these backlinks into
Well,
other
that's,
things that don't belong, and so it wasn't natural. But
yeah,
back then it was new, and people were like,
right.
"Wow, this is great. I can link exchange and be everywhere." And, but
Yeah.
that's great for a company that wants to expand globally. Back then I had a carpet cleaning business where all I wanted was local business. I didn't care about,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
China seeing my website.
Right.
I wanted, this little carpet cleaning business in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania to show up somewhere. And
Yeah.
so I created this website and put it out there, and people were like, "Wow, you're like on the internet. You're famous."
Yeah. 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 It's like the first time my Wikipedia page went up. So you got a Wikipedia page? Yeah, anyone can create one. So I don't know who created mine, but anyone can create one. And then, of course, nasty people come and vandalize it. But that's off topic. Uh, but uh, uh, but anyway, so I did the straight. I checked the box to do the straight exchange, and you can see we didn't get particularly high click through rates. It's the same normal for untargeted
Mhm.
click through rates, but and our ads were in English, so we're at least filtering for people who understood English, like mostly. But but to my mind, it got us some traffic, and then it seemed like every user we were getting, it must have resulted in some return.
Mhm.
For every one we get 2 more or 1.2 more or whatever it was. There's no way to measure it. But, and so that led to the sort of growth. And in the meanwhile, there was a whole other front, which was the investment front.
Mhm.
Because what we really wanted to do was get some real resources
Right.
so that we could properly scale. I mean, my co-founder Garrett was a lot wealthier than me. He could afford a hobby like this. I was kind of staking a lot on it. Um, but I had a real seize the day attitude. It's like, I'd been out of college for 15 years by that point, and so I realized that there are hot times and there are slow times,
Mhm.
and so we were in a hot time, and I wanted to try and make the most of what I thought was a really good vehicle. And so Garrett again came through in a huge way because he found uh, uh, the Rota Group, which was just starting as a, you might call it a advanced incubator. We didn't have these terms then, but an advanced incubator or very early stage investment. And part of their pitch was that they would be hands on and really help lead to the company's success. And I was going to say 100%, but 1,000% from my expectations, because I was expecting that just to be a story, delivered on that big time. And so, and this is quite a while later. So we had struggled along, growing, and we're really showing some traction. And in November of '97, we got this $1 million investment, and they had us relocate from our original, what I used to call original slum offices, which were in a 1911 building about a half block from campus that Philip Marlowe could have been in because they had the old classic doors with the windows in them, and uh, uh, you know the elevator still had an elevator operator. The guy who looked after the building, Ken, an older black man, he operated the elevator when people need to use the elevator. Most of it just used the stairs because we were young and running up and down the
Yeah.
stairs still. Uh, but anyway, but we moved into what seemed to us great offices over in Parker Street, a different part of Berkeley, and we had some resources, so we grew and hired more of the content curators, a couple more programmers. But the thing that they really did was they said, okay, uh, what do we need to do to take this business to the next level? Okay. And so the Rhoda Group, cleverly named after Roger and Dan Rhoda, so Roger Strack and Dan Miller, they had invested, they had a second company that also was co-hosted there. Um, and they said, okay, so the first thing is we need to change how we're talking about Ask Jeeves to the financial community a little bit because you know uh, uh, likening us to search engines, it wasn't resonating. And actually, a quick tangent. I have an example of that. We met with a venture capital, a number of venture capitalists, but a uh, venture capital firm. And a few minutes in, he stopped our pitch. He stopped us and he says, "Oh, this is a search pitch. If I had realized it was a search engine pitch, I would not have taken the meeting. Search is over. Excite has already won."
Mhm.
And it's not just that it was wrong, but when I share that story, because Google wasn't, Excite died, and Google, was around. Was he around? Probably around by then, or maybe
I
not
think Google
quite.
started, what, 98 or something?
Yeah, so I don't think maybe it hadn't even started yet, because this would have been '97. But it was a project at Stanford or something and getting a lot of buzz. So, yeah, Google's an incredible story. You should have Sergey on. Uh, but I mean, what they built was remarkable and continues to be remarkable, even if it is irritating and frustrating at times. Somehow that "Don't be evil" slogan seems to have faded away in Google's case. But which is another story. I don't want to go on that tangent. Let's see, what was I thinking about? So uh, Roger said, okay, so here's how we're going to describe it. We're a question answering service. And so originally there was Yahoo and the other browsers, of which Yahoo was the big winner.
Mhm.
And then a new sector showed up in this sort of information finding space, which was search engines. And I mean, I think Search Engine Watch had a list of around 250 search engines at that point in time. There are a lot of people who tried it, but they all tended groupthink. They all tended to operate in the same way, more or less. And then Ask Jeeves, which is the leading question answering service.
Mhm.
I think maybe Electronic Monk was around, which was I met this guy named Edwin Cooper who started that. It was like a little graduate student side project or
You
something.
know,
So there was very little in that space.
yeah.
And that is a way to talk about it, got over that kind of, not another damn search engine problem that we were struggling with.
Well,
Uh,
if you look back, the websites that we created back then we didn't have to worry about meta descriptions or meta tags, schema. We would
uh,
just put the website out there, and
yeah, and see what stuck
those
and then
services like
change it.
Ask Jeeves found us.
Yeah.
But now we have to, meta tag everything. We have to schema everything. We got to mark up. We got to do this. We got to go to Google Analytics and link every. And I'm like,
And well, you're
I got to
trying to
jump
trick an
through all
algorithm
these
or,
hoops just so
yeah,
Google recognizes a website.
yeah, you're trying to uh, uh, play with, or in some cases, kind of game an algorithm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas we had at our peak, we had about a little over 200 of these content curators, and we were always looking for new content, so long as it covered a topic that people were asking often enough.
Hmm.
And when localization came in, which was right around 2000 when I left as Chiefs, um, the that they had started the localized search, and so it was a lot more challenging in the sense of validating the different websites. But we had topics where you would serve to different people, localized results, but it was still had to be fit into the frequently asked motif, or else the economics didn't work out of having a human involved in it. Costs more than a
Yeah, and
massively
that's hard to
scalable
fathom
thing,
because
right?
nowadays you don't think about the human entering all this information.
Yeah, and
Nowadays it's
yeah,
robot crawlers that go through and get all that.
and it was then too, but that was for search. Like I said, what made us effective was the one-two punch. So it was the question answering followed by the search results that initially we got from our search partners, and eventually the company bought a search engine
Mhm.
and integrated it that way. And I think still has search partners, but our value add, our differentiator, was indeed that it was this curated content of question answering, where the sites had been found, reviewed, or and a lot of we had the same thing. Tell us about your site. We want to hear. Please
Mhm.
tell us. We want to hear. Uh, uh, yeah, but you can only process so much that way. But back to so Roger came up first with the strategic shift on how we talk to the financial community, and that helped a lot. The second, what because $1 million seemed like a huge investment at the time, but it really wasn't. Uh, the second thing was they said, uh, this problem that Jeeves solved, this sort of frequently asked search sort of model. I bet a lot of other companies have that same problem. And I bet we could license this for other companies to use on their site, sort of custom versions of Ask Jeeves, sort of a B2B to C marketing play. So it's a B2B sale for them to use to their consumers. And so, they just had the attitude of try things and see if it works. So Dan Miller, the co-founder of the Rhoda Group, Dan wrote Roger and Dan,
Mhm.
wrote a letter. He went old school. He wrote a letter, U.S. Postal Service letter, to Dell. He had a name in Dell, telling about us Jeeves and that we were offering this corporate product, and could we have a meeting? And he got a call, and they said, "Yeah, we'd love to talk to you." So he and I flew to Texas and met with a group of people at Dell, and it went really well. And sure enough, and I'll also go back. I have a couple of other things to tell that we learned, but I'll circle back to those because I don't want to interrupt the story with tangents. But it went really well, and they became our first customer very rapidly. And we had uh, on our board uh, 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 someone who was, uh, I'm not sure if they were an investor in or on the board of Compaq. And so when he heard about Dell doing it, of course, because immediately shared the news with our board of directors, right? He immediately, made some calls, and Compaq was all over us. And they became not only our second customer, but did a corporate investment round.
Wow.
And then it went on from there as we went in, and eventually, so jumping ahead, we had 50 or 60 top brand corporations in all sorts of sectors. Chrysler, Mercedes-Benz, American Express, E-Trade, just the different sectors. And we took a vertical sort of strategy on that, dividing it into verticals, where we could share some of that curated content. And then the rest of it was specific to their site. So the technical support was pretty much, building something just for information Dell had, but a lot of them were like tips on investing and stuff. So anyway, that went on and was the second major thing they did. But why that was so critical is not only extra significant revenue, but our story now was we have two revenue streams. And that turned out to be really important for the financial community all the way through going public. Because advertising is known to be cyclic. So what happens when advertising rates dip? Well, we have this corporate one to rely on. What if corporate sales slow down? Well, we have advertising to rely on. And so that was an extremely strong story that went with an actual real revenue source and real customers.
And it's funny because now you look at how computers are, and they're already preloaded with somebody's browser, mostly Google or
Yeah,
Chrome or
big advantage.
they pay for that placement.
Right.
But back in the day, these partnerships with Dell and Compaq really helped Ask Jeeves grow.
Yep. Uh, there were a lot of things it did, which leads me to another major thing Roger Strouk did. He told me early on, told us, okay, the key, one of the keys to being successful, I think, is enlarging the circle of influential people, influential people who have a stake in Ask Jeeves' outcome.
Mhm.
So through advisors and investors, we're going to try and expand that circle. And we got Ben Rosen. Ben Rosen was from Rosen 7, a big investment or financial. I don't think they're just venture investment, private equity firm
Mhm.
out of Texas. He was the one who was affiliated with Compaq. I
Mhm.
couldn't remember who it was at first, but it was Ben Rosen. And we got the most wonderful guy. He became famous as an angel investor, but he wasn't then, named Ron Conway. Ron Conway. Sorry, messed up his last name. Is an older man and just started being an angel investor. But he was wonderful because there were a couple of times when I heard of some new technology or something, a CTO, chief technology officer, I needed to know about. And so one time I just called Ron and said, "Hey, Ron, I need to know about this. Do you know anyone?" He said, "Well, let me get back to you." And 45 minutes later, he calls me back with someone who is total expert on it because it's the Bay Area. I went down and had a cup of coffee and with the guy, and came home with my head crammed of all the things I needed to know, and that was marvelous. And I took advantage of that a few times, and a couple of times I was the expert. Where Ron would call me up and say, "Hey, Dave, you know about natural language processing, don't you?" I said, "Yeah, I know quite a bit." And so that was a huge value add to me in my role.
And here you guys
Yeah.
are 30 years before AI, where AI is the large language models, and you guys were doing it in 1996.
We use entirely different techniques, But we were doing it, yes, and indeed we leveraged our proximity to Berkeley and had a number of what are called computational linguists. We hired one, a wonderful guy named John Lowe, was a font of knowledge,
Yeah.
not only about computational linguistics, but just funny stories about words and languages and how you can be misunderstood in multiple languages and stuff like that. But he came on, and we had an advisory board, technical advisory board that had computer scientists and really prestigious linguists, because UC Berkeley was right there.
Yeah.
And they helped make suggestions on how we could do better on taking what people typed in and matching it against what they wanted to know. So it was far more than keyword matching.
Mhm.
Um, and it, it helped
Yeah.
because we didn't have to go and say, okay, I got to, so when I started Ask Jeeves, I read two books. I did it old school, right? I had Automatic Text Processing by Gerard O'Neill, who had passed away by that point out of Cornell, and a really good book, Conceptual Information Retrieval. And I bought it at our local technical bookstore, uh, Cody's, that of course went out of business since. But it was Michael Malden, who was actually kind of famous because he was at Carnegie Mellon, but he helped start Lycos, and
Mhm.
Lycos was then a search engine. But so that was my foundation, if you will, in internet search and stuff, and I also then found Terry Winograd, who was a famous name from 1960s AI at MIT.
Mhm.
Uh, on understanding language syntax, and it was really a how to program something to understand language. And then I mentioned in this original Slum Offices, we hired two programmers. The second, just talk about incredible luck and a very active Bay Area, was there's this wonderful English guy, Dr. Swarup Reddy, is from London, and he had done his master's degree on exactly that technique. So when I met him, I talked to him, and he was looking for work, and he had I didn't even have a green card yet. I think I had to go through the H-1 visa process with him, which was first time I'd ever had to do that. No, it wasn't. I'd done it for another English guy before, but uh, he uh, uh, he agreed to take the job. I think he must have been skeptical, looking at kind of the little offices we're in. But we had great chemistry, and he was just a wonderful guy, but really, really brilliant and really into, he built things, and he was so delighted and so proud of what he did.
Mhm.
And Gary Shevsky was the other programmer, was the first programmer, and he made a huge contribution too. He went on to have vice president's jobs. Last time I heard, he was working at I forgot now. But he went on to have a very successful career. He was
Now,
also our first office romance because we had a part-time undergraduate named Bruna Yang working there, and they started dating. And it was kind of funny because they would leave the office at different times because they would try to be subtle about it, but we all knew. So we would kind of giggle and talk about it after they left. Ah, yeah, really secretive, aren't they? But a few years later, I attended their wedding, and
wow.
they're still married. Yeah.
Now, you
But
you
anyway,
said
yeah,
early on that you left
yeah,
in 2000. What was the
yeah.
cause?
If you uh, let's circle back to that
Okay.
because I'd like to kind of tell the chapter that happened. So we had the Rota Group on board. They brought in a couple of other smaller investment rounds, um, where people largely did quite well, by the way. And the compact round was like 8 million or something. It's like huge at the time. But this Garrett and Roger and Dan and I decided that we needed to bring in some more executives. And Roger found Rob Rubel, who came on as our first CEO. Uh, uh, you know, uh, uh, well, I mean, I had been CEO, Garrett had been CEO,
Mm.
Roger had been CEO, I think, but
This is a
our first professionally
non-owner CEO.
non-owner, right,
Yeah.
professionally hired CEO, and we couldn't have hired a better person for that era because he was so dynamic and so well spoken, just you know, perfect person uh, to lead,
Mhm.
to play the role of a leader. And we had grown up to about 30 people at that point. And then that led us to, and by the way, the traffic was just growing steadily. And we did our first ads. And believe it or not, our first ads were radio ads that weren't just banners on the internet, um, which might not make sense. But one of the things Roger wanted to do is just make more awareness in the Bay Area of Ask Jeeves, because he said there are just all sorts of people, not just financial people, but engineers and all sorts of interesting people out there. Because I'm not sure how many people in drive time heard the name Ask Jeeves when they got home, thought to go on their dial-up modem and check the internet. But then after that, we had more advertising, and some of it was great. But and then we expanded the executive team. So we had a head of corporate sales named Frank Vaculin. Head of the website was Ted Briscoe, who had gotten out of iOmega. He was great, and other people. I don't want to do a long litany of people, but we really then had a strong executive team, and we were able to raise in early '99. Well, I mean, it took a while to close, so we were talking to them for a while, but we raised a $25 million mezzanine round, and that allowed us to run our first TV ads and really start getting a real presence.
Mhm.
And then that led to us going public in 1999, uh, which was as exciting an event as you could imagine, for a company that had started off as my friend and co-founder's idea, and originally me working it on the side of doing my earning money as a consultant, and our original slum office and 7-person team of me, 2 programmers, and 4 content uh, curators, uh, who are pretty wonderful. I have stories about all of them, but I don't want to bog down on that. Um, and many of them went on to do other things, like Jenny Dabusco became a rather high-powered lawyer. Monica Dovalle wound up going to med school and then got trained as a pediatric psychiatrist. I saw her just last year. Uh, we caught up. It was fun. Uh, so these were, I think, there was just a pool of incredible people, and we were lucky enough to tap into them. Um, and then Marco Sorensen, who had mentioned, the artist. I mean, what good luck that was, uh, because the image is the most memorable thing about the brand, right?
Mhm.
And that whole story of approachability kept resonating. And at one point, we brought Penny Finney, who found the artist Margot Sorensen, in, and she started Ask Jeeves for Kids. And Ask Jeeves for Kids, we could have real fun with the character because, we're representing certain brand properties, so we're very constrained on the general public website. But for kids, Jeeves could be in an astronaut's outfit on the moon 1 month and in a deep sea diver's helmet deep undersea in another, and he could be, in a safari, and we tie it into things. There's a lot of school promotion things too, of curriculum that we put up free for teachers and stuff like that on SDs for Kids. And so we're doing this sort of innovations as we go along, and we had these wonderful television ads that you can actually track down on YouTube. My favorite is a guy is barbecuing next to his RV, and then it pans back and he says, Jeeves, and it pans back and there's Jeeves standing there, you know, uh, how do I do such and such? And Jeeves answers about barbecuing. And he says, Jeeves, what goes with barbecue? White wine or red? And Jeeves says, I believe that would be beer, sir.
Mhm.
So they had these sort of humor or themes to them, because some
Well,
were
I
more thematic.
remember, and maybe you can correct me. Maybe you remember. But I believe Disney had advertised on Ask Jeeves back in the late '90s, early 2000s.
It's
And then
entirely,
in
yeah.
their movie Ralph Breaks the Internet, they actually referenced Ask Jeeves.
There are a lot of references and to Ask Jeeves. Some that just happened a few years ago. So about 3 years ago, I think it was, maybe, yeah, about 3 or 4 years ago, post-pandemic lockdown. Um, the TV show Better Call Saul
Mhm.
was a period piece from that era, and one of the characters, he says, "So, how did you find out? Did Joey tell you?" And the woman says, "No, I asked Jeeves." I said, "Con Man Albuquerque," and your name came up all over the place. Something like that. But and just after uh, ChatGPT launched, my co-founder Garrett was interviewed by the Atlantic magazine, and the article was called "The Vindication of Ask Jeeves."
Mhm.
It was talking about how technology had now really caught up with what we were doing then, just in the technology wasn't as powerful or sophisticated.
No, but it was still ahead of its time,
It was, yeah,
I reference some of my books because some of them I wrote, and they didn't gain popularity for 10 years later. It's
right,
like, okay, I wish they would have bought it then, but it does take time, um, but
yeah,
transitions happen,
yeah,
and like you said, you departed in 2000, but when
yeah.
was it that they changed their name to
2006,
Ask.com?
2006. So again, Roger Strouk had in 1998 bought the name Ask.com because they were considering whether we should stay with Ask Jeeves or not. But various people said, no, no, you should totally stay with Ask. Ben Rosen actually was one of them. He says it's quirky, it's memorable. No one remembers these other search engines.
Right.
But I remember he had trouble negotiating because the guy wanted more money, and we wound up buying it for 35,000. But Roger knew just how to handle the negotiation. He said, more or less, we're making you an offer, and you have 24 hours to accept it or reject it, and then we won't talk to you again for 2 months. So we're not going to let you shop it around on us or something like that.
Mhm.
And so the guy took it, and we bought it for $35,000. And so for a while, we were Ask Jeeves at Ask.com. There was always a little bit of friction in the messaging. So it changed a couple of times. Um, and then I had also bought AJ.com early on when you could still get two-letter
Yeah.
uh, things. But that's too general for use. But they had that then. I don't know what happened to it. And then uh, yeah, so we got the executive team. We went public. We were trying all these innovations like Ask Jeeves for Kids, Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. We had a float and a balloon, so
Mhm.
Jeeves was in
Yeah.
that. So it was what was kind of incredible about it was a really resonant consumer brand. I mean, it had a lot of name recognition, a lot of loyal fans. When NPD did an annual survey of search engine usability, and we always ranked at the top. We were like out of 11 categories, we were top in 8, and Yahoo was top in 3, and we were second, or something like that. It was like a really, really loyal fan base, excited fan base that got, yeah, and it was, again, I think because its core value was approachability.
Mhm.
And therefore a lot that plus character, plus the image of the character and everything, people just remember it. Uh, and so we had gone public, and we're trucking along, and I saw and heard about a lot of people making a whole lot of money. But because I still work for the company and because the system is set up this way, I was unable to get any liquidity. So here I am, a salary man, basically, still paying off, uh, still with a mortgage and a baby. In 97, our first was born. In 98, our second was born. And, uh, living off of uh, what had been a very modest salary until at some point after we went public, they bumped up my salary finally to something really good. Uh, but that's still, it's still not big money. And then I had a technical net worth on paper that I could not get any liquidity for, uh, of many millions. And at its peak, it was many, many millions. But that's on paper; it doesn't count. So the president then was the head of the website division. Ted Briscoe was having the same issue that we were locked up. So he decided he was going to join or start a new company that and talk to some venture capitalists, and they put in money on day one. One of them was one of our existing Ask Jeeves venture capitalists. Ignore conflict of interest, doesn't matter. And so Ted asked three of us to follow him, and I was one of the three asked. And then after that, the bubble had already burst. It was, by then mid to late 2000. But I went in middle class guy and came out a low end millionaire, and didn't have mortgage problems anymore, and got first new car in 15 years, and things like that. That was the reason I left. It wasn't that I really wanted to leave.
You wanted to be treated better. You wanted to have the stock
I, well,
options that
I
you got.
wanted to get a piece of the action
Yeah.
in real terms. I wanted to get some money in the bank because uh, that was one of the points of founding a company, right?
Mhm.
Uh, 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 Part of it was the challenge, and there were a lot of exciting things. The experience was far more than just the money, but that was a big part of the ultimate motivation. And that's why I left. And the
Well, it was
company I
also
wanted,
the culture that you helped create, and the new
yeah,
owners probably didn't see that culture as
yeah.
something of a
So
legacy for you.
yeah, 2005, a much larger group. So uh, the company had gone down in valuation, and then was still doing all right, had money in the bank, managed their expenses, still had revenue, and then uh, starting in around 2003, things started picking up a lot again, and its revenues were going up, and it actually turned profitable somewhere along the way, and uh, valuation was going way up again, up to $1 billion-ish, which was big in those days. This 30 and $60 billion stuff basically didn't happen back then,
Yeah.
that you see
But
routinely
then
now.
then they got rid of the caricature of
Yeah, so
Jeeves and and
that
and they dropped it to ask.com, which to me what didn't make sense.
yeah, I think it was long term a mistake, but here's how that happened. So they're a much larger company, IAC. They bought it as a public company for considerably over its market cap, for 1.85 billion. And they looked at the character, and they liked the technology, and they liked the Ask.com name more. And they looked at the character and they said, the problem with the character is that it's niche. And if we're going to satisfy our ambitions, we want to move into the main market. I also heard, I don't have any way of validating this, that they thought that the Google guys were a bunch of nerds and that they could outcompete and outmarket them, that they were, they'd go the way of Alta Vista or whatever. Actually, another team of great guys. We actually had a partnership with Alta Vista, like I mentioned, search partners and stuff, and they actually used some of our results on their site. It was reciprocal, but they, uh, so they retired the character. They did it nicely, but they retired the character. And then they completely failed to compete effectively with Google.
Yeah.
Not that even if they'd done everything right, they necessarily could have, because Google was by that point technically far ahead and kind of a juggernaut
Yeah.
in terms of their brand and recognition. And they hadn't yet started doing things to alienate people as much. That really kind of came a
Well,
few years
Google
later.
forced developers, web people to start thinking like Google when it came to search terms.
Oh God, I
And it
had
was
a
like, I want to be, and that's the whole premise of my second book, Optimize
right,
This. I wanted people to learn the human element of search,
right.
which was the whole basis of
It
AskJeeves.com.
was. Yeah.
And Google is forcing people to think like a machine. I'm like, this isn't going to work. And
Yep.
and 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 now they're going back to this the AI and the agenics and all this because they want to bring humanity back into search.
Right. Um,
Only took 30 years to come full circle.
right. And I got to tell you, I had a job for a small startup company that did citizen journalism in it was about 2010 and 2011, the CTO of that company. But an awful lot of it was just SEO, and it got so boring for a technical person. But that's where our traffic was coming from,
Mhm.
and it's like, how do you know, rank? And
Now
it's not
you
about quality of the stories, quality of content, reader service, not about any of that. It was about how do you rank?
yeah,
How do you
and
produce content for free or
oh,
cheaply? And it's new, so it's got to be constantly fresh
right.
in a way that it will rank on Google.
Well,
And
back in the 90s, we didn't have blogs attached to our websites.
right,
That was
blogs were
separate.
exciting new things.
Right. And so I encourage people to always blog, because the search engines, the
Yeah,
AIs pick all that content up and
yeah,
can give people better answers because now they're saying, hey, this is what your company does. This is what their core philosophy is. This is what they stand for. And but people are lazy. They don't want to blog. They don't want to add content to their
yeah.
website. And then
It
they
takes
wonder why
effort.
they're not ranking.
Yeah, no, I quite understand, and that is, I mean, when people are an awful lot of people, first off, they just uh, kind of lazy or just, but an awful lot of people go outside of their comfort zone and they freak out.
Yeah.
They won't go out of their comfort zone, or if they do it, it's very, you know, yelling and screaming.
Mhm.
Uh, and so, you know, uh,
I've always been
yeah,
curious about computers. I started learning them when I was a teenager and took computer programming
right,
in high school and college. And I remember back in the late '80s, I was at Penn State in one of their
yeah,
satellite campuses, and we could message people back and forth within
yeah,
that college community. And
yeah,
this was years before messaging even
right.
became, known to anybody.
I
And it was
remember
like,
yeah,
yeah,
the
we could
first
do
time
it.
I saw email over the internet at college because it
Yeah,
was academic then, and I'm going, "Wow, this is great." You mean he's in Germany? Wow,
yeah,
that's totally great. Uh, yeah, and everything was so. This is why I'm very lucky because I'm the same way, and my career as a technologist. Every few years, I've got to learn a bunch of new stuff.
mhm.
And sometimes I've got to more or less reinvent myself technically, the transition to machine learning, the transition to search and
Oh, and and
natural
and
language
and
technology.
coding
You
language
know,
has changed. Back then I learned
everything changes.
DOS and
Nothing.
BASIC and Pascal
Yeah,
and COBOL, and now you're like HTML and this and
right.
that. It's like,
Nothing since maybe except maybe Unix
eh,
still exists from when I was in college and right after. So you've got to be a person who's curious and interested
yeah,
in continually learning. And like I say, sometimes in major transition trends, you almost like in reinventing yourself. And a lot of the people I know dropped out as programmers or technologists because they felt like, okay, I've just become an expert in this thing. You know assembly device drivers for General Dynamics computers or something,
yeah,
you know, and then suddenly no one's buying General Dynamics anymore, or the language changes and everybody's using some newfangled language like C++, you know,
right,
and they are unhappy. They can make the transition. It's learned it the first time, you learn it the second time, but they're unhappy doing it, and so they wound up, starting a print shop. Some of them much happier doing that.
yeah.
Becoming lawyer was a really popular one. Yeah, and then you meet all sorts of people who used to be lawyers and now chose other things, because they really didn't want to be lawyers
I've
anymore.
helped a
So
lot
it
of lawyers
happens.
over my last
Yeah,
30 years, and Some of
Yeah.
them are very curious about the internet and websites, and some wanna tinker and learn. I get it, but it's not their wheelhouse, so, you know, I don't practice law, so get out
Yeah.
of the computer. Mm,
So, yeah, one of the big problems now is the chicken and the egg problem because AI, it's sort of building the knowledge into their models because they're so massive. I mean,
yeah,
it's just mind-boggling to me how massive they are. That's why they're building these, vast data centers for
mhm,
that and the fact that usage is soaring. But and so at some point, uh, they're not, they like Google at least, and most of them, they provide links to references or sources, but I don't think those get followed very often.
no,
And
and with
usually,
AI, you're given one choice now, which is kinda good. It's you don't have to deal with, 20 different choices on the blue links in their Google.
you can understand the attraction to it, but then, there are people out there who are creating this content and they're doing it for, you know, often financial reasons. And if they're not getting the traffic, you know, that's not going to continue on. And so then you stop having people putting this up, and then you're shrinking the knowledge base
Mhm.
that future iterations of the
Oh, yeah, don't get me
AI
wrong, I'm not
models
against AI.
have to
I think
build.
it's a wonderful
Yeah.
tool, and I think it's helping a lot of people understand computers and it's helping them with coding and
Oh, yeah.
writing
I
and
use
all
it every
kinds of things.
day.
But,
I use it every day. But I think
when
the financial model may have to change, is what I'm
yeah,
really getting at, because you've taken the traffic away from people who are providing part of the value add, which is those chunks of knowledge.
mhm.
Um, and, AI isn't inventing those things, or if it is, it's hallucinating.
Yeah. Well,
Uh,
I think
you know,
sometimes it looks at the whole picture and then tries to extrapolate, and I'm not saying it's hallucinating, although it's a term that people are using. It's trying to fill in the blanks.
that's exactly right. It is filling it in statistically correctly, but in actual
Right.
verifiable fact incorrectly. And uh, and they're doing a lot of things to address that now, and a lot of them are proprietary, so I no longer know what they were. Chat GPT, when it launched, was based on GPT-3, and I made it a point to learn exactly how that worked because it was, in academic papers, and there were, you could actually download little models in from GitHub and look at it. So I went through the exercise of saying, okay, I understand exactly, how it works as a word prediction model, and I understand why it's a bit unpredictable because humans can't make sense of the giant neural network, even if you scale it down. Once you get about beyond, a dozen nodes in your neural network, you can't really figure out why it's
Yeah,
making
though,
choices
lately
anymore.
this new
You know,
model,
yeah,
I think it's 5.5 or 5 something or other. A lot of times it starts to mansplain stuff to you, it's like,
yeah,
"What?"
yeah. But if you tell it to stop, tell it to stop being so verbose, be terse, it'll usually back off on that. But there should be settings for that because I bet they could adjust the model or fine tune it in different ways
Mhm.
to cater to individuals who fall into these more explanation, less explanation categories. Uh, but that's led me with AI to think about, uh, if I were to found Ask Jeeves today with limited resources, I'm a load programmer. Uh, uh, what would I do? And I came up with sort of the notion that you make it character based, so you're conversing with a persona with certain characteristics you're trying to project. Uh, that instead of a large knowledge base of questions you know how to answer, a large database of prompts that are really well done and stuff. So that if you ask about one of those prompts, they would have to be frequently asked. Uh, what would they would match and engage using that prompt in the background. and and the prompts would actually be templates. So I'd fill in the third part is what does it know about you, both from prior in the conversation and what has it learned over time. And then what it learned over time is fully visible to the user so they can edit it or delete things out or whatever. Um, uh, sort of personalization, because my idea is okay. So right now with they're actually ChatGPT is starting to do something like this anyway, but for a long time it was like uh, uh, it, you, every day is its first day on the job. If you have a really good helper or assistant, you want them to learn about you
Mhm.
and tailor what they help you do or tell you to your results. And then the last thing is start actually allowing you to do things for people, like actually book their dinner reservations or whatever. And so I built a prototype of it. I call it Jeeves Junior. So jeevesjunior.com and Jeeves Jr. or Jave spelled out, but JeevesJR.com. My daughter, who just graduated from college in May and in graphic design, she created a character for me. And, it's a pretty simple website right now. But I'm at a juncture where I'm trying to decide what to do with it. Do I want to try and launch it? Do I want to try and get investment for it? If I can find some younger people to partner with me and help me do it? Or do I want to do a Kickstarter, which is what I might very well might do, and see if there's enough interest there, then I could at least launch, a prototype or a beta
Mhm.
and test it a little more. But the other thing that's really big is once you get users, it changes how you work with it because you get feedback and you can also see the data of what they're really asking. So that was huge. In April of '96, we launched just before right around the Yahoo Pick of the Week and stuff like that. It really changed how I looked at Ask Jeeves back in that era. I had almost looked at it as a library science exercise before, where sure we haven't gotten to medieval poetry yet, but we'll get there eventually. And just saying, no, 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 it's nothing like that, because we could see what people are asking in the question logs,
Mhm.
and we immediately became a data-driven uh, company because what people were really interested in, the frequently asked was a whole series of things. And so Elizabeth Childs, who was one of those content curators, just graduated from UC Berkeley. She championed that and really kind of then played sort of a team lead role on the content curation to make sure that the content we created, the questions we knew how to answer and how we put that all together was really focused on what people needed to know wanted to know. A lot of times they didn't need to know it at all. It was about Pamela Anderson pictures. That was an eternal top one. The other queries about Las Vegas, questions and stuff about Las Vegas was another one that came up a lot. The entire time I was at Ask Jeeves, Pamela Anderson was in the top 20 queries. It just was relentless. Uh, and you can kind of understand why, uh, but she was hugely popular and very appealing. So. I mean, Google Zeitgeist, when they had that way back in the day, it was the same thing. It was like the most great thing. She was there too. And I talked to the guy at Hotbot. I've forgotten his name now. It's a great guy who was their CTO at Hotbot. Which is another search engine. I don't know if you remember it or not. But uh, he said, yeah, Pamela Anderson's always there. So it was pretty ubiquitous. But anyway, I went down that tangent for a reason. So with Jeeves Jr., I'll have data and I'll have feedback. And so that can help inform me on whether I want to take it to the next step. But I need a few resources to finish the phone app and to be able to have the infrastructure to actually launch a website securely on the cloud. I'm using right now Microsoft Azure for this project.
How's it
But it
feel to
also,
how's it feel to start over 30 years later?
yeah, well, I've started companies or joint startups all the way through. So,
Mhm.
um, I mean, a friend and I tried to start a company. Was it? Yeah, it was last year, but it didn't get any traction with our original angel conversation. So after a few months, we gave up on it. It seemed like a good idea to us, but it wasn't resonating. And then before that, I was CTO of a startup company for a couple of years. So,
Oh, but this is
but it
this
is
is
exciting. This
this
is
is
my
Jeeves
own.
Jr. This
Right.
is
The idea is really, really exciting. It's
Mhm.
it's it's really, really exciting. But you know, I've been around the block enough to know that most things don't get off the ground, but doesn't mean you don't try. I mean,
Right.
that's the thing. I mean, Roger and Dan were the great champion of this. Like when they started on the initial investors, Roger Strauch and Dan Miller in Ask Jeeves, when they said, "Okay, let's tell this sort of market repositioning story to a few people and see how they respond. Let's call on Dell and see how they respond." Uh, and then that it's this feedback loop. So I'm saying, we're looking at the data, but it's not just data. When we got in front of Dell way back in 1990, early 98, I think it was, um, they, we're in a room, it's like Dan Miller and myself, and 17 people from Dow because they're a big company, right? And Dan sort of led us in a conversation with them, and we had this one bullet point on a slide that says, and you'll be able to see what the people coming to your site are asking about. We talked about that one bullet point for like 20 minutes. So in our next presentation to Compaq, we had a whole slide on it. And by the end of the month, we were launching Ask Jeeves Insights,
Mhm.
a major feature that took some of what we were already doing for the public website and extending it to analyze. Because what we learned was they had no idea. They knew people were coming to their site because they could see they got the hits, you know, but they really had very little idea of what they're doing. They could see what pages they visited. They could, in a primitive way, string it together, but they could. Whereas someone comes in and is presented by ask us a question, they're telling you exactly why they're there, and that was invaluable. And
Mhm.
so the thing about putting something up and why I might do that with Jeeves Jr. is that you start getting these different sources of input, and it can really guide you and also tell you if you've got something that's resonating or if it's a ho hum.
Mhm.
Um, Now, the challenge with it is the world's moving so fast right now. By companies that have literally tens of billions of dollars you know, in their coffers, in their war chests,
Yeah.
and so uh, it's very hard to compete in that sort of environment. So you've got to find a way to differentiate, and so that's what I'm really looking for. Is to look for that different niche that still has upside,
Mhm.
but that is distinctive. And then how do I uh, get feedback on that, and then promote it, and then taking something out of Roger Struck's playbook, how do I increase the circle of people who then would have a stake of influential people who would have a stake in its success?
So how do people find you?
Now,
Yeah.
uh, usually on LinkedIn, or they track down my email or occasionally my phone number. I try and check LinkedIn every a few times a week, uh, and so that's the primary way. I'm not really that active at this point on social media or on YouTube or anything. Although I'm thinking about possibly doing a little more of that. And then we also have this site. I'm trying to preserve more of the stories and uh, things about Ask Jeeves itself. So I've started askjeeveslegacy.org. So you got to spell it all out, askjeeveslegacy.org. Uh, but we're capturing, things like those movie appearances like Wreck-It Ralph or
Mhm.
Better Call Saul. And there are a lot of them. And other places where like on a Joe Rogan episode, they discuss SGs for several minutes. This is it was a few years ago. It was like 2019 or something, but things like that. And then I'm tracking down things like our ads and magazine articles and stuff like that. And then third is I've started something called Insider Stories. And I'm just starting to reach out to people who are there in that first year, year and a half, and asking them to contribute their memories or give me feedback if I'm remembering things incorrectly or not telling the story right. But the otherwise, in another 10 years or 5 years, nobody will really
Well, I'll remember.
remember it. You know, even though it was a major consumer brand,
Yeah,
that really resonated, it won't be remembered. Also, all the context will be lost of what
yeah.
those amazing early days of the internet were and how it's intimidating to a lot of people, but still very exciting. Uh, it's really funny. I came across a news interview, and the person was talking, and the reporter kept having to explain things because he knew his audience would know them. Or two, how they have the banter between two anchors and how they're just not sure what they're talking about. So I've seen a couple of those because I've been searching on YouTube recently, and there's a lot of stuff out there, but it needs to be pulled together and organized. So we're just sort of curating it. Again, I've enlisted my daughter's help a little bit until she finds her first
Oh,
career.
this was great, and I
Yeah,
appreciate you being here, and I hope the audience had gotten a lot of wealth of information from you because this is history. This went
yeah,
down in real life in real time, and you were there. And,
and
and
it,
and for me, I mean, I was there too, but I wasn't. I was a bystander watching all this
yeah,
happen. But I was a user, and for
yeah.
me, I Ask Jeeves was probably one of the best search engines at the time. Probably still better than what's out there now. And now we have AI, and it's like, wow, okay, this is Ask Jeeves all over again. But
Acids on
yeah,
steroids in a way, but
yeah. So
but lacking
I
in personality. I still say it's lacking in personality, and it should
yeah.
have
Well,
that.
it's once they lost the butler of Ask
Yeah,
Jeeves, Ask.com to me it was nothing compared to what it was. And
I I I agree, but I'm biased. And the other thing I would say is that look where it wound up. It literally closed its doors last May, just a few months ago.
right,
Uh, so clearly the direction they did take it on and their attempts at reinvention, uh, uh, ultimately in the long run, were not successful.
right.
And they lost track of who their customers were, and didn't put up. So this, I think, was your point in the video where I reached out to you.
Yeah,
They weren't delivering the promise that had been out there, that had resonated,
yeah,
and then you know uh, uh, that led to a decline. And once you get in that decline cycle, it can be very hard to recover.
that's right.
Yeah,
So I want to thank the audience, and I'll see you guys on the next episode. But please visit David over at askjeeveslegacy.org, and if you have a story, share it with him, and just tell him I said hi. Adios.